How's it going, everyone? Just wanted to insert a quick note before this episode. There was a couple glitches with the audio. It wasn't like we lost any of the information. It was just there was a bit of a sync issue in Zoom, probably due to poor Wi-Fi on one of our ends. And the other thing that was a little frustrating is that for some reason, the mic on Joel's end wouldn't pick up the example calls that he was making. So what I've actually done is for the YouTube watchers, I've inserted a video, and for the podcast listeners, I've inserted audio clips at the end of the podcast. So if you pay attention to all the way to the end, you will hear examples of the three main calls that Joel talks about: the lost calf sequence, the roundup bugle, and the bull calling cows bugle, or what he often refers to as the BCC. And what I've done is I'm going to play them each like 3 or 4 times, just so you don't have to keep rewinding. So if you watch that section or listen to that section, you'll get an idea of what he was talking about. All right. Hope you enjoy the episode. Thank you very much. Welcome back to the Mindful Hunter podcast, everybody. I'm your host, as always, Nichol. We have a very special guest this evening, Joel Turner. Most of you guys who follow me will recognize Joel from the Controlled Shot Process, Shot IQ, recent appearance on Joe Rogan. Some of Joel's accolades was in law enforcement for many, many years. But I don't know if everybody is aware of how, I don't know, accredited is the wrong word, but the kind of accomplishments you have, not only in competitive elk calling, but your own kind of personal elk hunting history. So I think most people would think this would be an archery and a psychology of shot process conversation. And I think we're actually going to spend more time dealing with the elk stuff, because not only do you have quite the history in elk calling and elk hunting, but you have a very, I don't want to say controversial, but what would be a better word for it? Like a unique approach to elk calling. Like it's not your standard, location bugle, challenge bugle type of stuff. You tend to have a different take on it. So I'd like to dip into that a little bit. But before we kind of get into that, I'd kind of like to rewind a little bit. And I've never heard the story, or I don't know your personal history, but do you come from a hunting family, and was hunting as a young boy and a young man something that just naturally happened, or how were you exposed to hunting early on?
My dad took me hunting when I think I was still in diapers. But it wasn't, it was this thing that we did. I have 2 older brothers, and we would go grouse hunting every year in September. Okay. That was our big thing. And we didn't get to carry our firearm until we were 11. That was my dad's rule. I took hunter's ed when I was 7 years old in 1983. And so at 7 years old, my dad's hunting partner was the hunter ed instructor. So just from a very young age, I got to shoot my first blacktail when I was 12. I shot, still to this day, the biggest blacktail that I've ever shot. I shot when I was 12 years old.
That's hilarious.
With a rifle. And I remember the trigger yank on that was amazing. But I started bow hunting for elk. I had a buddy in high school and in I went to school with this kid from, I think kindergarten. And he lived on the best elk property of anywhere around where we were in Washington. And so I was really privileged to go hunt on his place with him. We had no idea what we were doing. My dad bought me my first elk call when I was 12 years old. He bought me a Bill Lohman mouth reed, and I got lucky. I stuck it in my mouth and I started making sounds with it, and it sounded pretty good. I called my first bull in that year when I was 12 years old, and it was just an amazing experience. And I started bow hunting for elk when I was 14. And calling bulls in when I was 14, but I was so engulfed in target panic at the time, there was no way I was ever going to hit one.
Right.
And, but my dad continued to rifle hunt, and elk hunting for us growing up was a rifle hunting affair in a place where my dad grew up rifle hunting. There were very few elk there. You could only shoot a spike bull there. which we could never find. I was never successful when I hunted with my old man, but it was a thing we did every year. It was elk camp, and it was fun, and I got to carry a big knife around. I remember that. I've got old home movies of me carrying my giant Randall big sticker around, and but then I kind of broke off from my hunting with my dad at 14. And because he wasn't a bow hunter, and I wanted to bow hunt, and so
where did that come from? Did you see that, or is it in the magazines? Like, where did the interest in bow hunting come from?
I mean, Bow Hunter magazine, but archery was my life from 7 years old on.
Okay.
I mean, rifles were a thing that we did. I wasn't a good rifle shot. I was great with a BB gun though, because of no recoil. Now I know that now, but 20. And BB guns, I was your guy for that, but was not your guy when it came to centerfire rifles or shooting a bow. But I loved shooting my bow so much. I remember shooting my little recurve until my fingers bled. I mean, I shot it every single day. And then my mom was, she bought me, progressively better bows as she saw this interest. And so I got my first compound, I think, when I was probably 12. I think I got my first compound. And then by 14, I was shooting a Martin Lynx Magnum, just an amazing bow. But to show you my knowledge level at that time, I did not know that the draw weight was adjustable on a compound bow.
Okay.
So I got this Martin Lynx Magnum, and it was set at 60 pounds, and I couldn't pull it.
Yeah.
So I would do so many push-ups every day just trying to get stronger so I could pull this bow. And we took it to the bow shop, and my mom was there with me, and she took me in there, and she's like, well, Joel can't pull this bow. Can we trade it in for something else? And they're like, it's adjustable. So they simply turned the limb bolts down, and then I was able to pull my bow, and the rest is history. But when I started working in a bow shop at 16 years old.
Okay.
And just
now, is this all happening in Washington? Just to give people, like, I know you're a Washington native, but that's where this is kind of taking place. This whole story up till now.
Yeah, it's all happening in Washington, and the elk hunting in Washington was not great, especially where my dad would take us. But then I got on this other property with my buddy, and the bulls would scream, and we would call them in, but we had no idea how to kill these things, and I'm sure we had inadequate equipment. And I look back at the pictures now. I think I was shooting 1916 aluminums, autumn orange, out of a 45-pound compound. So probably wouldn't have done much to him anyways. But yeah, it was. So I started working in a bow shop, still fully engulfed in target panic. Can't hit anything with my bow, but just loving watching the arrows fly.
Yep. So
frustrated at that time. And I think I was, let me think about this. It was 2005, all the way to 2005 when I started competition elk calling.
Okay.
And I took like 8th in the first year, and then I took 3rd in the professional division in 2006. Then I won it in 2008 in the pro division, and I won it in 2010 in the pro division as well.
So give me an idea culturally, because the rest of us are kind of spoiled these days. Like, there's a bunch of online forums. There's like Elk University this, and, this camp, and, Lampers and these other guys are doing big camps. And for people who want to, immerse themselves in elk hunting knowledge, it's almost overload. But back in those days, that was not the case. Mm-hmm. So was a lot of this stuff like you're calling trial and error, or were there seminars you could go to? Were you reading articles in magazines? Like, how did you figure out like your style of elk calling back then?
It was watching Larry D. Jones, Elk Fever VHS tapes.
Okay.
And watching these guys call these bulls in. It was all back then. It was all cow calling and bugling. Even as it is now, it's still everybody has immersed themselves in cow calling and bugling and not really knowing what they're saying. I know that we're going to get into this, but So I was just at that time trying to figure out, when to cow call, when to bugle, didn't know what the sounds actually meant. And nobody really knew what they really meant. They just had a technique that worked for them one time. And, There was the old timers back in those days. I mean, there was these whistles that you would make out of a piece of copper plumbing tube, and all you could do was whistle. And P.S. Old made one that looked like it was orange plastic, and it was actually a whistle. But because so few people elk called back in those days, in the 80s and early 90s, it worked, you know. And but those things don't necessarily work anymore. So I didn't really have a style. I was just copying everybody else, and I did not really learn how to elk call until I became a cop. And
that's an interesting transition. We got to follow that thread.
Yeah, and that's where I got my techniques on how to really call these bulls in, because what I noticed was that every bar fight that I went to was over a female.
Right.
And essentially that's all the Elkwoods are, is a giant bar scene.
Right.
And we are trying to get another male to come out and fight us. And the best way to do that is to speak inappropriately to their female. And that's how we get to instinctive elk calling. And so up until that point, when I became a cop in 2001, it wasn't, I did not know how to humanize my elk calling.
Okay.
And once I started to watch the human interactions of drunk human beings with no inhibitions, that's when I started to put the puzzle pieces together and turn into what is now known as what we call instinctive elk calling, where it's a biologically correct system of calling that they really have no option but to come to you. So it's pretty interesting stuff.
So let's dive into that then, because I do think, it was funny. I was talking about this with somebody the other day, and I think when you first get a bull to answer you those first few times, you kind of fall in love with that so much. You kind of forget that you're supposed to be hunting them, and you start doing things just so they call back to you.
Right.
Because that's a metric of success. Holy crap, I made a noise, then he made a noise. Right. I'm going to make a noise again and see if he'll make a noise again. And then you kind of do this back and forth. And I think this has happened to every early elk hunter. And then you just kind of burn them out and they kind of like wander away. And I'll admit that's kind of where I am. I have a handful of decent noises that I can make. I don't have a real deep calling strategy, but I recognize that in certain situations, certain noises produce certain effects for me. But I definitely lack that kind of like deeper understanding of why I make certain noises at certain times, other than real basic stuff like a location bugle, a challenge bugle, these types of things. So let's get into that then, the actual like the background and the principles of what is instinctive elk calling.
So instinctive elk calling is basically the humanization of elk sounds, because we don't speak elk, but we do understand how other human beings react to certain things in certain situations. So let's take the bar scene. A lot of people they practice a couple of sounds. They'll practice cow calls, like mature cow calls, and the whole array of mature cow sounds like estrus buzzes and a regular cow mew and an excited mew and a gathering mew. And there's all these different ranges. But what you have to understand is, when was the last time that a human female got together with all of her girlfriends and spoke nicely about another female that wants to procreate with the man that they have chosen?
Right.
That doesn't happen in the real mammal biological world. So when you can practice all of these cow sounds and you can sound so tonally perfect, but you're not one of the clique.
Right.
So those cows do not like you. It causes all kinds of suspicion when you make mature cow sounds, and you become a sexual threat to these cows because they want to procreate. I mean, they have to further the species, so they have to have calves. They choose a bull. They're not going to allow one of the elk that is outside of their herd. They're not going to allow their bull to go mess with the hussy in the bushes. So when people get in close on elk herds with cows, they cow call and they literally kill the entire situation.
This is very interesting. I actually just had somebody reach out the other day when I was throwing up the Q&A, and he didn't write one in the box because it was too long. but he described a situation he's been having with kind of this same bull over the last couple of years, where he can kind of get into 60 or 80, and then the part of the scenario I found interesting is then he will watch the cows pull the bull away. It's not the bull that gets fed up. And that's interesting because I've never really thought of it. We focus so much energy on how to elicit a particular response from the bull that I've never really approached it this way, where you could be eliciting the exact opposite response by putting yourself out to market, so to speak, as another potentially hot female. You're actually creating a conflict with this group of females that he's already with. And these are the ones he has. And, there's that whole, adage about the dog with the bone who goes and looks over the water, and he sees the bone and he drops the first bone to get the second bone. And it's just a reflection. Now he's got no bone at all. And I think this elk is like, a bird in the hand is better than two in the bush. So this is very intriguing because you're now becoming competition to these cows.
Right. Just look at it in the human world. That doesn't happen. They don't speak. They don't allow their bull to go over. They don't allow their man to go over and deal with another female. So, when you watch the dynamic happen, you watch the cows, and there's a bull there, and he may be completely interested, but those cows, just as soon as you do a mature cow sound near a herd of cows, ears go up. Total suspicion starts, they get all nervous, and they take their bull away. There's no such thing as a lead bull. There is a lead cow, right? The cows dictate where the herd goes. The bull is just following. Everybody thinks that this bull is pushing the cows around. He is not pushing the cows around. That lead cow is going wherever she wants to go, and the bull is just following behind her because that's all he has to do, right?
Yep.
So you have to think of it this way. If you were in a house with a bunch of people and you heard an adult female outside, how many people are going to empty out of that house?
Right.
None. Because what they're going to do is they're going to go to the door and they're going to look around the corner and go, oh, geez, is that Tweaker Jane out there again? Right? Yeah. So suspicion is through the roof. If there's an adult outside yelling, nobody's outside, right? You're going to look at the door and you're going to just creep around the door and check out what's going on. But if there's a baby crying outside, room empties. All inhibitions are gone from every human in that room. So if what you need to do is keep all of your female elk sounds on the calf spectrum, because then you are not a sexual threat at all, and you have elicited instincts with these elk. Maternal instincts, protective instincts, paternal instincts. You got all this stuff going on. Everybody wants to help a baby, but nobody's going to help cause a suspicion. So if you keep all of your elk sounds or your female elk sounds on the calf spectrum, you remove the sexual tension there and the sexual threat, and now that everybody wants to help you. So it's as simple as that. It's, if you just keep it on the calf spectrum, and people have a hard time doing that because they've practiced their cow calls, right? So anytime you practice a call, people, they have that ending and they're all trying to get the nasal ending. Well, it's the nasally ending that makes you a cow. A calf doesn't have the nasally ending at all. It's one note, goes up. That's it, right? So, and also when you're doing your calf sounds, do lost calf sounds. You have to add emotion. Emotion is so much more important than the structure of the speech, because when you add emotion to it, think about how many cow elk are called in every year with a predator call. Right. It's not even an elk call, and it sounds hideous, but it has that emotion in it, right? Of something that is in distress. So if you add the next level to that, and now you're a calf in distress, man, you're calling everybody in. And we use that in very particular situations, like bulls are pedophiles. Bulls don't care how old that calf is. Right. Like in the human world, if there's no society limits whatsoever, is a male going to go after a 16-year-old or a 55-year-old female? Right? there's with no societal limits, we're going to choose the younger one every time for childbearing purposes.
Right? There's an evolutionary drive there for sure.
Right. It's so let's use these things against these elk, and they never become call shy to it because it's on the instinctive level. So I deal with, when I have a bull with no cows, it's all calf sounds. Okay. People are like, well, I call bulls in all the time with cow sounds. Great. But you're going to call them all in with calf sounds.
Right.
And there's no hang up spot with calf sounds. The room will empty. Everybody's going out and searching for this baby that's lost. So when you're doing calf sounds, I do not run into hung up bulls. Right. That 50 or 80 yard bull that's out there that has stopped as soon as he can see the calling location. That has not happened to me as soon as I switched all of my female elk sounds to the calf spectrum.
Do you have any content online, or can you point to some? Because I know people are going to want to go and hear some of these calf sounds versus cow sounds and kind of practice on that. Do you got any recommendations?
Well, if you follow J. Scott Outdoors, he's got a lot of amazing elk footage on his Instagram. Okay. And I also post on my Instagram, Joel Turner _shot IQ. Got a lot of clips of me doing these calf sounds. I've got clips of me calling in calves. It's all about the emotion that you send out there with it. And so people think of calves kind of a neat, real little short stuff. Calves are doing that almost every break. When they are lost, it is loud and they are looking for everybody.
Okay.
So, I can do some of that stuff for you right now if you want me to.
I would love it. That would be great. Thank you.
Okay. So like I use Barry calls. It's a dome, golden dome, small bull. It's a single reed call from Barry Game Calls. And the reason that I use these calls, number one, they're ultra consistent, but you can't even get into the cow spectrum with them. Like you can't screw this up.
Right.
Whatever sound you make with this, as far as elk of, end of months, it's all calf. Like you can't even drop this thing off into the cow spectrum. So like a calf series would sound like calf series would be like this. And you'll notice that when I do that, my mouth doesn't close at all. Because as soon as you close your mouth, that's when you get the yeah. And as soon as you do that, you are the hussy in the bushes. And the cows will not allow their bull to go to that. Now, I don't do that a lot when I'm near cows unless I don't know where they are. Like that would be a sound or a sequence that I would out over a canyon after daylight. I would send that out on a bench in the middle of the day that I haven't been on yet as a cold calling scenario. That sequence will pull a response from any elk that can hear it.
Can you hit that for me one more time? I think your microphone kind of cut out on us halfway through.
Sure. I'll try to, I'll do it a little bit farther away.
Okay. Yeah, weird. It keeps cutting out on us. I wonder if it's just at a frequency.
It might be too loud, huh?
Yeah, it could be. We can point. I will say, last year you did you posted some really good footage directly to your Instagram. So if people are looking for examples of this, go to Joel's Instagram and kind of scroll down the grid to about a year ago, because you got some really good live calling sequences that are kind of captured in the moment where you're making these types of sounds.
Sure, I can post them. I'll post them again probably tomorrow so that they'll be out.
That'll be great. That'll be great. So you're saying you'll even use these for location purposes?
Absolutely. So, it is my sole location sound that I use after daylight.
Okay.
Because bulls are not doing location bugles after daylight. They're doing roundup bugles. They're doing bull calling cow bugles. They're doing challenge bugles if there's another bull there, but they're not doing location bugles. So this is a much more effective way to locate elk than to do bugles. Because even if you, like, let's say you throw out a bugle, maybe you do a challenge bugle after daylight. Well, a bull might bugle back to you, but you've already killed the situation.
Right.
Right? You've done a sound that's not going to make him come toward you. You've already put him on alert that you're another bull. So why would you do that? There's no reason to do that.
Right.
So, like, let's say that if I do a location bugle, which is high frequency, right?
Yep.
If I send that out there, one of the things that people overlook with location bugling is receiving a bugle back.
Right.
Because if you're standing there, your partner is going to want to be right next to you usually. And they seem to have all kinds of candy wrappers in their pocket. They're making all kinds of noise. So you need to separate from, if you're with somebody, separate from them, get at least 20 yards away from them. And teach them to actually receive a bugle. So when you send out that location bugle, you send it out, and then you put your tube away very quickly, and then you ready yourself. So I don't close my eyes, but I'll usually be looking at the ground. It's usually dark out. So I'm looking at the ground, and as soon as a sound starts, any sound, it might be a bird, it might be who knows what, might be an elk. But as soon as any sound starts, you move your head. And what you'll do when you move your head is you'll actually echolocate the elk. Because if you don't move your head, what happens is you think that it's directly in front of you.
Yeah.
And your partner thinks it's directly in front of them.
This is why the two guys you location bugle and you go like this. They're like, yeah, it's over there. And you point in opposite directions. Been there 100 times.
He's definitely, oh man, he's in that. And like, no, he's not. He's way over there, right? And you don't know where the hell it is. And then you can't get it to bugle again for some, right? So be ready to receive the bugle as soon as, get your head to one side, and as soon as the sound starts, just move your head very slowly, and you will then echolocate that elk, and you'll know exactly where they're at.
And you tend to stick to location bugles only in the dark.
Yeah, I only do them, and I'm usually locating about 3 a.m. when the woods are quiet. There's no birds. There's nothing happening, but you're making their thing, right? They're doing all the tending bugles, all the glunking, all the breeding, all the feeding. They're doing all kinds of stuff, but nothing else in the woods is making noise. No bugle out. You get ready to receive it. A bull bugles back to you. Cool. Now your only job is to figure out if he has cows or not. If a bull bugles from the same spot twice, he has cows.
Okay.
If he has moved and bugled, then he probably doesn't have cows. So you would get closer to him, wait for daylight, get the wind right, and then just calf call him in with no hang-up spots. It's beautiful. But if a bull bugles twice in the same spot, now you have the bar scene. So he's going to do location bugles, and I believe that bulls do these location bugles in the dark to warn other bulls to stay away from them.
Right.
That makes sense to me, right? So they're doing this high frequency bugle that carries the furthest to send out the furthest reaching warning that this is my canyon, stay out of this canyon. And another bull will bugle back to them to warn them to stay out of their ridge or whatever it is. So when you hear bulls location bugling to each other at night, they're not getting closer to one another. They're simply checking on one another and warning each other to stay out of there. So when you send out a location bugle at 3 a.m., they want to bugle back to you to warn you to stay out of there.
Right.
That's the beautiful thing about it.
They're not hooking up.
Them.
Like,
you're
you don't watch them get closer to each other. They kind of, this, the first time I really saw this was in New Mexico, because I've never really had the opportunity to be around so many bugling bulls, but it was almost like a little game of Pong, because I could actually see 5 or 6 different little cliques, like little harems, and they would kind of, get close to one another, and then they would bounce off, and then they would go over here, and they would bounce off. And it was like they had this little force field that extended out to their comfort zone, 200, 300, 400 yards, whatever it was. Right. And then they would get to within to that distance of one or more of the other herds, and they would all just kind of bounce off of each other out in the hills without ever actually running into each other.
When herds of elk come together, it's not a good thing in the rut, right? I mean, that's when bulls fight They don't want to fight. So they warn each other constantly and keep tabs on one another. So when you send out a location bugle, which is just hitting the high frequency, don't chuckle on the end of it. Just hit the frequency, send it out there as a warning. They will all bugle back to you to tell you exactly where they are. It's a beautiful thing. So if you have a bull bugle back to you, that's when I would get closer to them, but be careful of the thermals because you're probably going to be above them. So get way off to the side. And then as it turns daylight, you're going to hear roundup bugles, which is short, fluty, no chuckles. No chuckles is the key, because if a bull chuckles, that means he's talking to another bull. If he bugles with no chuckle, he's talking to his cows or somebody else's cows. That's a key point. Okay, so he'll be doing roundup bugles that are very fluty, short, no chuckles. That means he's on the move. So now he's going to start moving to bed, right? The cows are going to start moving to bed, and he's trying to keep track of them. So he'll be doing these roundup bugles. Now the bugle changes to a little bit more rasp, and you'll hear more emotion in it, but no chuckles. That means that's a bull calling cows bugle. So he's talking to his cows. He's trying to round them up and go to bed. When he changes to that, when you hear that change in emotion, that means the cows have stopped and they are now in their bedroom. And you may have gone 3 or 4 miles to wherever they're bedding. You may have only gone 300 yards. You don't know what's going to happen with these elk. So once that bugle changes, that is the key time to kill them for me.
Okay.
So it's around 8 o'clock in the morning. They've gotten to the room. The bull gets very frustrated because those cows are trying to feed some more. That's when I will slip up to the same contour that they're on the same ridge, same contour, and I'll come in from the side. I'll get very close. I'll try to get within 60, 70 yards of the cows, and that's when I hit them with a bull calling cows bugle, which is short, raspy, no chuckles. That's the key. Because if I chuckle, if I go in there and I challenge the bull, I am now dependent 100% on the bull's attitude on whether he fights me or not. But if I walk into the bar and I speak only to his females, then he has no option but to remove me from the bar because his females might be interested. Right? So you just approach it that way. Just cut the chuckles off. Don't do any chuckling, because then you're talking to the bull and you've lowered your odds. And this is what you were talking about earlier, the controversial part, right? Because people say, well, heck, I call in bulls every year by chuckling. Yes, you will call bulls in by chuckling, but you won't call in as many as you would if you didn't chuckle.
Right.
So there's just, you are going to have, when you walk into the bar and you challenge a male and he is drunk enough for attitude, you will find yourself in a fight. But what's the percentage of that? Right? Like 30 or below. But if you go in and you speak to his females, very high. I mean, 95+%, you are going to find yourself in a fight. And so that's how I run it. I'm either calf calling in bulls that don't have cows, or I'm getting in tight on, if he does have cows, I get in tight on the cow, a bull calling cow bugle, and he comes to try to kill me. There is no hang-up spot associated with the bull calling cows bugle either.
Okay.
So, I can do these calling sequences, and if I am with somebody else, I can be right there in their back pocket to help talk them through the shot. Or if I'm by myself, I don't have to call and move because he's coming all the way to me to try to kill me.
Right.
So it's just a phenomenal system with such high success rate.
No,
and
it kind of makes sense.
And
it addresses some of the issues, like the real common issues you have, like this one where you get in, you bugle and he bugles, and then you kind of do this dance where you just get equally far away from you, which has always made intuitive sense to me because like it's evolution, it's nature, it's risk versus reward. And if this bull currently has a half a dozen cows, he has in some ways, if he can just stay just outside of your danger zone, he has nothing to lose by doing that. And so he will keep just moving away. However, if you're talking directly to the women, now he does have something. You've created that sense where you've removed the choice from the equation for him. So that's a very intriguing option. Like, it's definitely another interesting tool for the toolkit. I hadn't thought of it in that way before.
Yeah. So people do call in elk other ways, but I have very high success. Like, I've called in 50 herd bulls with that one sound, the bull calling cow's bugle. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to have no chuckles.
Right.
That's the key to it. It's
so you're
like
saying
I could
shorter,
go into a bar,
little raspier, kind of energetic, no chuckles at the end.
Yep.
And are you going as high
chuckles.
as a location bugle, or are you keeping it a little more mid-range?
No, it never reaches that high. It's just, done.
Okay.
Right. I'm speaking to his cows. It's a second to a second and a half long bugle. You can put some lip ball in there if you want, but it doesn't really matter as long as there's no chuckles. Because imagine this. I go into a bar in Finland. I don't speak Finnish, right? But if I went in there, I spoke inappropriately to a female.
Yeah.
The dude is definitely going to pick up on my vibe. He doesn't know hell I'm saying, but he's definitely going to pick up on my vibe. It's about the structure of your speech. Right. To elicit those instincts.
So how do you know when to do the bull calling cows versus the lost calf? Or are you going to go with one, and if you don't get the response you're looking for, you're going to go to the second?
It all depends on if he has cows or not. So if I go in tight on a bull with cows and I get within 60, 70 yards of those cows, and just one cow, it doesn't have to be the whole herd.
Yeah.
So I'm going to slide in silent, and I would have calf called my way in there. If I lost their location, I would simply do a lost calf sequence. He's going to try to call me into the herd. The cows are going to mew to try to call me into the herd, right? The cows may even come out to try to get me. But if the cows come out to try to get me, who's going to be right up their rear end? The bull, right? So I've killed several bulls that way before. But if they go into a timber patch and like, I don't know exactly where they're at, and I'm trying to get 60, 70 yards of a cow, I'll just do a lost calf sequence. The bull will instantly try to call me in because he's a pedophile, right? The cows are going to have maternal instincts, so they will call back to me. So I'm not bugling my way into these things. If I'm making any noise, it is a lost calf. So I locate him. Okay, cool. Now he's just over this rise. That's when I'm going to slide in. Oh, there's a cow. I get ready. I get set. Arrow's knocked. And that's when I hit him with the bull calling cow's bugle. Now, a bull that bugles, again, if he bugles twice in the same spot, you can assume that he has cows.
Okay.
So this is the technique to kill him. You use your calf sounds to get your way in there if you need to relocate him. But if a bull bugles and he moves and bugles again, it's usually moving toward you. He doesn't have cows.
Okay.
So just continue on a lost calf sequence. You only need to do probably one more for him to really pinpoint you, and just get ready because he's coming all the way. They come in very quickly to calves. They come in way faster to calf calls than they would with a cow call. Been my experience. I mean, they literally trot in. And a lot of times what happens when you calf call is a bull will mew to you. If a bull mews to you, he is committed to the relationship with that calf. He's coming all the way.
Okay.
And if they don't mew to you, if they can't get to their hang-up spot, they can't find you, they'll kind of do a little search bugle, but that's as far as they're going, right? It's kind of it's real lazy, and they're just like, hey, where you at, right?
Right.
But they're not coming any farther. They'll do that on calves as well, but they'll usually do it while they're still moving. So as he's coming in, he'll be doing these little search bugles, but he's coming all the way. It's like their inhibitions are gone. They're coming to either hump or help with it.
Okay, this is fantastic. Now I want to take a little bit of a shift in direction here.
Okay.
Another one of the primary reasons I wanted to get you on is because you're from Washington, and being a BC resident, a lot of the elk content is really directed towards those guys in the major Western states. And I don't want to say that elk calling is easier or harder in any one location, but I've been fortunate enough to hunt elk in a few locations, and I do believe elk behave differently in other places. And here in BC, we tend to have not particularly vocal elk. Our elk populations are pretty low compared to most of the Western states, so the densities are pretty low. We have wolves in pretty much any location that we have elk. So, and we have really, really thick timber, all of which you could equally say about Washington. So knowing what we know now about the system, is there any particular tips or tactics or words of advice that you could give, to the BC residents and maybe more generally the Pacific Northwest residents who kind of have this different set of challenges than what a lot of people are putting out advice and tactics for?
The big thing in the Pacific Northwest and BC is the only difference you're going to have in these elk. They act exactly the same way as a red stag in New Zealand does. Or a Rocky Mountain bull. These Roosevelts or Cascade Roosevelts, they all act the same, but they don't do as much location bugling.
Okay.
So you got to figure out a different way to locate these bulls, and that's where the calf calling really comes in.
Okay.
Now, when you're in wolf country, that's exactly what a wolf is listening for, right? So you have to be when you're calling. I'm in grizzly country here in Montana, so it's calf calling. You just have to be very careful with it. I've called in numerous cougars with calf calling. So just kind of be aware that you're making a sound that the predators are listening for, but it's also a sound that the elk are looking for. So when you're change those tactic ups to exactly what we just talked about, but don't expect bulls to be locating at night because the density is not high enough for them to do that.
Right.
Like you experienced that in Mexico where the elk density is very high.
You could hear it all night, man.
We don't have
I'd be
that
sleeping in my tent, literally like keeping me awake as they were like you were just. It was just going off like a war zone. I'd never heard anything like that in my life. I was just like, this is crazy.
That's very rare in lower density populations and on Roosevelts in the on the coast. So, but they do all the same stuff. They just do it on a lower level.
Yeah. Okay.
Like I've called in Roosevelts and I was 30 yards from a bull, and when he bugled, I could barely hear him.
Right.
At 30 yards, I watched him bugle. It's the only reason I really knew he bugled. It's so quiet. They get very intimate with these calls. When you're calf calling, inhibition just goes away. So just don't expect the location bugling to be as effective when you're in these thick timbered areas. But the calf calling it's a ubiquitous sound. Every calf of whatever elk species you're looking at does these sounds when they are lost. They are loud, very vocal, and everybody wants to help them. And elk, how could an elk possibly become call shy to that? They can't. Because even if we were, even if we went out into the parking lot to find the crying baby and we didn't find anything, okay, next day, another crying baby's out there. We're going to empty the room again, right? It's going to take more and more time to become too suspicious to go out there. And our urge to go out there, especially if we have no societal limits, is going to be just as strong. So elk don't become call shy to this stuff. But if you're walking around doing mature cow sounds and challenge bugles, meaning you're bugling with chuckles at the end of it, of course they're going to become call shy to that.
Right.
Those are sounds that drive elk in the other direction most of the time. Sure, yes, people are successful in calling elk in with those sounds, but they're not near as successful as they could be if they were biologically correct.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, I want to respect your time, and I got a fair amount of questions on Instagram, so we're gonna take a bit of a left turn here so that I can get these guys questions in. So the first one is, what is the one skill or trait elk hunters overlook that holds them back from going to the next level?
Most elk hunters try to hunt with a partner. It's the worst thing you could ever do. Hunting with another human being just creates more scent, more decisions that have to be made. You're restricted in your movement. it's the worst thing you can do is to hunt with a partner. It's the overlooked thing. And it's very daunting, as you were saying, it's very daunting to take on this task of killing a 600-pound critter. And when it's on, oh my gosh, now what are we going to do? How are we going to pack this thing out? They may not know how to do the gutless method and bone an elk out or whatever. Maybe they're in grizzly and you're worried about all that stuff. But hunting with another person as a hunter is the worst thing you can do, because we're not pack mentality. And so you'll find yourself free to do whatever you do, and the decisions you make are your own, and you can just go and do and survive and learn how to butcher an elk. Like on what's it called, Elk Collective, I bone out a complete nilgai antelope, which is as big as an elk. So I show you the cuts to do to bone thing out. Like when I have an elk ground, when I'm by myself, when I get to that elk, it's 50 minutes, 50 minutes, and that thing is in bags and ready to roll. Because I get to butcher a lot of elk every year. I get to harvest a lot of elk every year because I do culling operations for the state and I do culling operations for zoos. So I'm dealing with these big critters all the time. I've been boning out critters since I was, my dad, we always processed our meat at home. So, probably 5 years old, I was cutting up deer, and so now I butcher anywhere from 15 to 30 elk a year. So become proficient at the cuts. It's not rocket science. Just keep your blade against the bone and you'll be all right.
Yeah.
So that's the one skill, is become self-sufficient in your elk hunting and quit looking for a hunting partner. You don't need one.
From a guy who does most of his hunting by himself, you're preaching to the choir, man. I'm going to be solo this year. And the reasons you mention are what attracts me the most or makes solo hunting as satisfying as it does for me, is that I get to do whatever I want, whenever I want. Now, the flip side of that coin is that you have to wear the responsibility for every decision that gets made. But if you're a person that doesn't mind bearing responsibility for decisions, that's not a big deal. Right. I like it a lot. Okay. Spike camp. Well, this is funny because spike camp and moving camping every day is kind of the same thing. So I'm going to interpret this question a little bit differently. Would you tend to work from a base camp or more of like a bivvy style, take your camp with you every day if you're in the early rut and high altitude? So
I hunt out of my pickup. So I sleep in my pickup.
Yep.
And if I need to spike camp, I will, but not usually more than 2 days.
Okay.
And I don't hunt the same elk more than 3 times.
Okay.
So even if I get on a bull, you just be very careful. Try to kill that bull the first time you meet him.
Okay.
First impressions are huge. So don't get in a rush, right? Figure out this bull, figure out where he's going to bed. You've just heard him go to bed. Don't go in there and make sounds that are going to drive him away. We already talked about all that. But just be very careful so you can kill him the first time you meet him. It's so much more effective, because if you call him in once and it doesn't happen, it gets more and more difficult to call him in again, and he'll usually shift locations to a worse location,
right?
Maybe thicker, whatever. And if a bull gets in those situations, I'll move. I don't stay on the same elk all the time. I'm constantly moving. If I need to drive 50 miles in the unit or whatever, I'm going. I'm looking for different elk and locating different elk all the time. So like when I spike camp, it's very minimalistic. I've got, I usually hunt in a day pack because I carry what's called a pack out bag. I don't know if you've ever seen those, but it's a bag in the front and a bag in the back. So I can roll it up and put it in my day pack. Yep. So I don't have to hunt with a pack with big frames and stuff on it. That pack out bag, once I kill a bull, that thing comes out, my game bags come out, I bone that bull out, I put in that pack out bag, and I can take almost half an elk at a time. You can pack so much more weight when you have it on the front and the back and you're balanced.
Right.
So, I usually will stuff whatever I need for the night. Sometimes if the weather's going to be good, like there's been numerous nights where I just curl up under a tree.
Yep.
Especially if I need to learn a bull. Like if I don't know where a particular bull's coming from, I will stay with that bull at night until I figure out exactly where he's coming from and what his travel routes are. I've done that numerous times where I just get my down coat out and just sleep in the brush. So with nothing.
So this is interesting. So I got a follow-up question to this because you kind of just described, I've run the gamut from BC, but I used to go in for like 7-8 days and I didn't know why all these people had wall tents. And then I used to bivvy hunt. And it's like, now I understand the people who are successful in BC hunt BC in a particular way. So I'm going to be truck hunting this year. I'm going to the same spot where I was last year. I was fortunate enough to kill a bull last year. So I got my let's say 8 or 9 different spots. Now, how long are you going to go into a spot and not find elk before you move to your next one? Like, what's your strategy in that regard? Are you going to spend a couple of days? Are you just going in once? Is fresh sign enough to keep you around, or do you need to hear something to keep you around? What's your thought process in that regards?
If I know, like if I go into a place and there's elk sign, I'm going to make sounds that are going to pull a response from any elk that can hear it.
Okay.
So if you go on Google Earth, there's a thing called Viewshed. So you set Viewshed at 2 meters high, and it will show you everything that you can see from particular. You can see it, your sound will reach it, and their sound will reach you from that location. So I use the Viewshed as a bugle shed to show me what pockets am I missing with my bugles or with my location, my lost calf sequences, so I can really cover an area. I'm very confident in the sounds that I make. So if I go into an area, let's say that I get there after light, and if I send a lost calf series down through that canyon and nothing calls back to me, that there is definitely a bull in there. A lost calf series down through in there. So I move almost a mile with my sounds, right? And based on that Viewshed, I know exactly what I'm hitting. I'm very confident in my sounds that I'm making. So if nothing calls back to me, I just treat it as they do not exist there, and I just move. I move to the next terrain feature, wherever my sound could not reach, because your sound doesn't go. Sound can now reach again, and I hit it again. So I can cover vast amounts of ground very quickly without having to actually go into the area.
So if you've got to your spot, you kind of know where you got to walk in order to get your calls into all the potential locations in that spot. You do your walk. Maybe you go in there in the dark, you hike till noon, you've hiked it out. If you've walked through there and you don't hear a peep, that's it. Back in the truck, you're going to go to your next spot and maybe hit them on rotation, because maybe in 3 days this place will light up again. But for now, you scratch that spot off the map.
Yeah, like I'm going to a spot next week in Idaho that I've never put boots on the ground in there.
Yep.
But I've also heard elk bugle from the unit next to it.
Okay.
So I've heard bulls. I know exactly where I'm going to start. And when I'm moving through that area, I'm just going to be hitting those higher terrain features, sending that sound down through there. I mean, it's to the point now where my goal is to have an elk bugling within a half hour of boots on the ground in a new area.
Okay.
And sometimes I've gotten to areas at 1 o'clock in the morning and I just take my shirt off and I hike to the highest point that I know of. And I'll send those sounds out, and that tells me everything that's in that area.
Okay.
But you got to be making those biologically correct sounds.
Yep.
So
okay, we're gonna switch it up to some shot IQ controlled shot process questions.
Okay.
This gentleman asked a generic question. I'm going to tie it to a specific one. So he wants to know if you're going to expand your in-person shot IQ classes moving forward into the next year. And I want to know what we got to do to get you up to Vancouver or BC in general.
So the shot IQ courses, I'm gonna stay in 2024. I'm gonna try to stay in the Pacific Northwest.
Okay.
BC included in that.
There we go.
So I want to go places that I can drive to, because I flew so much in 2023. And there's a lot of demand for it. I have people put in clinic request forms on my website, but I want to stay local this year because I've started a whole new brand called the Turner Method, which is going to take me to some other venues in life. But the shot IQ stuff is so much more concise now than it was. The live clinics are very, very much life-changing. But what I did, because the clinics are so clean and concise now, I completely refilmed my entire online course.
Right.
I basically filmed myself doing a live clinic to the camera. So it's what you get in the online course now is very close to what you get in the live clinic. So it's very interesting because now the only difference between those two things, the online and live, is your determination level.
Right.
Like, how much determination do you have? Do you need me standing right next to you, giving you the stink eye, right, to get your determination high enough for you to say, okay, Turner, watch this. I'm going to shoot this shot with control no matter what. Just watch this, right? And it's that watch this factor that is missing from, not missing from the online course. Like, the online course it's everything in the live clinic without me standing there watching you.
Right.
So some people need that. A lot of people don't need that. They just need the knowledge. So that's the difference. But yeah, if we need to come to Vancouver or wherever we need to be up there, we can certainly do it.
Okay. I'm gonna touch base with you after this about that.
Okay.
How can you mimic the intensity and stress when executing a shot in practice?
So you really can't. So what you have to do is you have to mimic the reality of the shot. It's not going to be just elevated heart rate. It's going to be all kinds of other things as well. You're going to have increased respiration, increased perspiration. All of those things are going to usually equate to a larger movement in the sight picture.
Right.
So you're going to shake, right? So to emulate that shake, what I do now in my clinics is I literally grab onto people's stabilizers and I just shake the crap out of their bow as they're moving through the trigger.
Right.
Shoot off of 1 foot, right? Do your push-ups and your pull-ups and all your squats or whatever you need to do to get that heart rate elevated. The main thing is that the new concept that we have is thoughts aren't thinking, right? So all you're doing with this stress training is you are training in getting your thinking louder than your thoughts, because thoughts aren't thinking. Thoughts would be, oh my God, it's a 7x7, or gee, I hope I don't miss. Those are thoughts. Thinking would be, I'm going to draw back and aim. Then I'm going to address the trigger. Then I'm going to say, here I go. Then I'm going to say, pull. That's thinking. That's different than thoughts. You can't control your thoughts, but you can always control your thinking if you make a decision to lower your heart rate through breathing. Because when that big old bull's coming in, or big buck, or whatever it may be, or you're standing on the line at Vegas in a big tournament and everything has become slightly overwhelming, that's when you have one job. That job is to lower your heart rate. You're going to do that through breathing. To do that, however, requires a decision. You have to decide to put your conscious mind into breathing. How do you do that? Just say the word, right? Breathe. Because what you say is what you think, right? Thoughts are what you hear. Thinking is what you say. So we have to think about breathing. And when we do that, there's all kinds of different breathing techniques, but one of the best ones that we found lately through Huberman was this nasal inhale to the top, and you can speak to this maybe, a nasal inhale to the top and then an extra inhale above that.
Okay.
And then let it out through your mouth. And what that inflates extra sacs in your lungs and allows you to expel more carbon dioxide, which lowers your heart rate even faster. Because what we used to have was box breathing or combat breathing.
Yep.
In through the nose for a 4 count, hold for a 4 count, out through the mouth for a 4 count, hold for a 4 count. This nasal inhale is much faster, much more practical for us as hunters. So when you do that and you do a couple of those breaths, you lower your heart rate down below about 160 so that you can now access your prefrontal cortex where we actually think.
Right.
Then you can make that decision. I'm shooting the shot with control no matter what. Okay, draw back and aim, done. Hook into my trigger, done. Here I go, done. Pull, or whatever your words are to direct your trap your concentration. So being able to think is the main skill. To do that, you got to keep your breathing in check. That requires a decision.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm going to ask the next question, and I'm going to give an example of someone who I think exemplifies this, and I'd be interested in your perspective. So this guy says, if you're consistent at punching the trigger, does it matter? If so, when? And the guy I would bring up would be Tim Gillingham, because he's a famous trigger puncher. He's been phenomenally successful with his kind of style. I can imagine where you're going to go with it, but I would be interested to hear what if that works for you. Why would you potentially not want to use that system, or are there specific times when you think that system would have a higher likelihood of failure, and that may be negative?
Okay, so when you punch a trigger, when you go open loop on a trigger press, meaning you move it faster than you could stop, that means that there will be pre-ignition movements linked to the trigger motor program, okay? That is the limiting factor in accuracy. When you look at, let's take Tim as an example, that's why he has to put so many stabilizers on his bow.
Right.
That's why his trigger has to be, you can blow on that thing and it goes off. And he will tell you that he has everything set like that because he can't hold very well. But the truth of the matter is you don't have control of your aim anyways. But in the terms of Tim, he is timing it. He has his bow slowed down. He has the pin movement so slow that he can actually catch it when it's in the middle. Yeah. And he has his trigger set so light that his movement is so slight. It's such a slight pressure increase that the pre-ignition movement that is linked to it is minimal. Okay. Now, having all that said, it is simply an accuracy limiting factor.
Right.
If you can't have all that stabilization on your bow because you don't want to pack all that crap up the mountain, then if you do punch the trigger, you are plateaued. You got about 6 months into your archery career, and that's as good as you're ever going to get because you don't know what pre-ignition movement is coming.
Right.
And you don't know at what level it's coming, but it is getting linked to your trigger motor program. So that's the science of it. If somebody is very consistent in punching, that's okay, as long as they separate themselves from the aim, as long as they get their aim done first and they always separate from it. Like when I have clients come, like if I'm guiding an elk hunt in some state somewhere, the clients will come in, I'm like, okay, where are you at? Can you even put your pin on the target? Because probably 60-70% of people that are out there can't even put their pin on the target without punching a trigger. So if can you put your pin on the target? Yep. As long as I have my finger off the trigger, that's one of the main answers. As long as I keep my finger away from the trigger, I can get my pin on the target. Okay. That's a start. Get your pin on the target first, and then you address the trigger. That's the key. So if somebody's going to punch a trigger, at least say something to yourself after you aim to get yourself through what we call the critical second, so that you don't rush your shot. Do critters get killed every year by punching triggers? Oh yeah, a pile of them. But if you want to reach this next level of accuracy, you first have to start that with at least separating from the aim. So if you are a trigger puncher, that's cool. But just realize that you're probably about as good as you're going to get. But if you take the next slight step up in accuracy, or at least hunting accuracy, when you draw your bow back, before you go punching on that trigger, just say something like, "Here I go," because it will start you down the path of shot control. If you punch a trigger, usually what happens in high stress situations is now we rush. So as soon as we get the pin where we want it, we punch that trigger.
Yeah.
And that's when we get these collapses that used to just be a little micro collapse. Now they're big, right? Which actually significantly changes our point of impact. Like you see people on TV, they're shooting these whitetails in the guts at 15 yards.
Yeah.
Oh, I rushed the shot. Well, but then you watch them practice and punching the trigger in practice. So they're literally practicing their own failure.
Right.
So many of them will draw back, and as soon as they get the full draw, they'll put their finger on the trigger, and they haven't even aimed yet, because now they're going to put their conscious mind into the aim. And as soon as that pin gets, like if I'm using this clock, it's boop, and it goes off, right? Yeah. So you want to be able to put your pin where it needs to be, then here I go, then you can address the trigger. That's if you're going to punch it. If you don't want to punch it, if you want to realize the highest level of accuracy, then draw back and aim first. Stick your pin in the middle, then you address the trigger, then you make the decision of here I go, and then you talk yourself through the movement. And when you do that, and that's your plan, like that's how I'm going to shoot my elk this year. I am going to shoot a controlled shot. I'm going to do those 4 things. I'm going to draw back and aim, then I'll address a trigger, then I'll say, here I go. Then I know exactly what I'm going to say to talk myself through that trigger work. That's very powerful when you know exactly how you're going to do something, especially in a high stress event.
I feel like I should have opened up with this story just to like set some context, but I've actually known Jeol for quite a while. And you kind of just described my exact situation. And I do feel like with the punching of the trigger thing, it's kind of like an escalation. It's not a problem at first, and it's something that you can control at first, but then it just slowly creeps like worse and worse. And I was to the point where I was doing that drifting thing, because I was that guy, as soon as my pin got up, it would explode, because my brain was afraid of the explosive reaction. It didn't want to let that happen to me, so it would pull the trigger as soon. So then I got to the point where all I could do was aim high and then slowly let my pin drift across the target. And it was kind of like just managing this lack of choice. Like this is going to happen anyways, so at least I can make it happen as favorably as possible. Then I took, and I can't even remember where I initially, might have been Snyder. I don't know. Heard about it from wherever it was. This has got to be 4+ years ago. Took the online course. And I just want to mention one exercise, because I tend to be a bit of a cognitive guy. So when I can understand something, it helps me implement new skills. And you had the pen tip exercise where you had the red dot on the screen, and you ask the person to hold a pen and then put the tip of the pen, you know, the red dot is whatever, 2 or 3 feet behind you. And you have to, in your sight, line up the tip of the ballpoint pen with the red dot. And all of a sudden what you know, and because there's no pressure, there's no stress, your body's not, it's just one hand. It's never going to be perfectly still. You notice this thing that you call pin float. And it's almost like a little figure 8. And it just drifts a little bit to the left, drifts a little bit to the right, drifts a little bit. And it just kind of, a little bit up, a little bit down. But it essentially stays in this little like pocket of goodness where it's like, and then once I tied that to the fact, like the pin is allowed to float. Like it doesn't have to be, and I can't explain the physics of it. Like I don't know how my pin can be a little bit to the left and the arrow still hit where it was supposed to be. But and I think maybe that's because like the whole system is floating at the same time. Like there's a little bit of give and take. But recognizing that it was okay to execute my shot sequence while that pin floated, and as long as it was an acceptable amount. It can't be bouncing all over the place. But having that freedom, that there wasn't this anxiety that's once I got over the target panic and I'm like, okay, now I can execute this whenever I want. That was like step one for me. Step two was realizing I don't have to have this pin exactly in the center of this target 100% of the time while I execute my shot sequence. So for anybody who's listening, who's like a bit more on the cognitive end of the spectrum, that was the most valuable thing for me in the online course, was that it allowed me to put names and like principles to all of this stuff that was going on in my mind. And then what happened was, I think I emailed you and asked you if you had any courses. And this was even back before you'd started a whole lot of the in-person stuff. You invited, it turned out you're only a few hours away from my house. You invited me down. I came down for a whole afternoon. You kind of convinced me to switch to a hinge. I bought a True Ball Fulcrum Flex. And to this day, the funny thing was they have a matching thumb button. They have the Abyss and the Fulcrum, and they match. Right. So I bought them both with the thinking was, okay, I'll practice with the hinge, and then I'll take the thumb button hunting. I've never actually shot an arrow with the thumb button. Still to this day, it's like a $250 release. I take it as my spare because at least my anchor point will be the same. But I practice with that hinge. I hunt with that hinge. And people always ask me, like, aren't you afraid you're going to be in like a high pressure situation, or you're going to be fighting wind? And because there are times in animals where you would think you would want the ability to punch the trigger, to take advantage of little microscopic openings. And the best way I can describe it to people is I have my shot sequence, and once I get set, and my controlled shot process actually works better for me in hunting situations, because I get this like laser focus, world goes quiet. Like I'm one of those, I just hit that place. I get real cold, real fast, heart drops. Like I feel I just perform way better under stress. And the only way I can describe it, once that pin is sitting where it is and I'm settled into my shot, it's almost like once I make that mental decision, this is when the arrow needs to go. It just like my hinge just opens. Like it's amazing how little, when you have that hinge at the right angle and you're not stressed about it and pulling back on it and doing weird stuff, it is such a minor movement to get that thing to open. But other than, I think I killed 2 animals with an index trigger. I've only been shooting a bow for 6 years now, but 98% of the animals I've killed have been with that hinge. And the only animal I've ever missed, and I'm sure I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. There's lots of people who've killed way more shit than I have, but this system works for me. I've missed 2 javelina. They're like my Achilles heel of animal. These little footballs that sprint around. You know what I mean? Right. But I've been very fortunate in that the system, and for me, moving to a hinge, I just feel much more comfortable with it. Has worked very well for me. But that was to address that individual's opinion. I did feel like punching the trigger was working for me. And then I had to rebuild, and you warned me too. You're like, you're going to have to rebuild your whole system. And there was a couple months there where I felt like I was shooting like shit, because at least there was a certain level of reliability with punching the trigger. And when I had to go rebuild my whole system, it was almost like taking golf lessons. Like it fell apart for a little bit before it got rebuilt back up. But then once it got rebuilt, the level or the potential of my shooting skill, I feel like the ceiling of what I was capable of moved so much higher. And I still have a long, long ways to go, but with practice and whatnot, I feel like I can get there. Bit of a long story, but I think that's important because
that's a great story. Like it's visual proprioception. So no matter which way your pin moves, its next movement is always back to the center. If you just leave it alone.
Yes.
If you just watch it like a picture, it's always coming back to the center. You don't have any control over it anyways. So stick it on the target, enjoy the show, and then switch your concentration to whatever movement you're doing on whatever release aid you're using. whatever, if it's hooking in on an index and pulling your hand through the strap, if it's a thumb button where you're hooking your thumb around it and stretching your hand, if it's the new thumb button with the click in it where you just run it to the click, then here I go, and then just press a little bit more, or if it's the hinge. It's just a movement, but that movement causes an explosion. That's why it requires a conscious override of your central nervous system. That only comes with you making a decision to do so.
Right.
So again, draw back and aim, then address the trigger, then here I go, then you talk yourself through the movement. And when you keep it in those 4 simple steps, you can rebuild your shot very quickly. Like if people go, oh man, I don't know if I should do this right before season. You should, because it really doesn't take months. It takes one controlled shot, and then you blueprint how to do it. And we teach you how to do that on the online course. Teach you how to blueprint your shot. It's just 4 questions that you ask yourself. And then you understand exactly how to do it, and you can do it for the rest of your life. It is very powerful stuff.
Okay, I want to respect your time. We've kind of already gone over the hour. Really awesome stuff. Greatly appreciate it. As we close out here, you already mentioned the thumb button with the trigger, but I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk about the new release that you were working on in partnership, and then anything else that, you mentioned there was some new footage about the online course. I will put links to Shot IQ, your Instagram, YouTube, all that other stuff in the show notes, but maybe talk about that new release a little bit, and then anything else you got coming out that people should be aware of.
In the professional archery world, there's a lot of professional archers that end up shooting a hinge because it's the only one they can really control.
Right.
And it's got a click in it, right? So a lot of them use the click as a form check. I don't teach it that way. I teach it as a conscious, separate movement. I use it as a presence point. The click triggers a decision. The decision triggers speech, which is your concentration into the movement. And so a lot of these professional archers, Bodie, my son included, they will shoot a thumb button for a little while, and then they get punchy with it. And so they'll instantly go back to their hinge. And then they'll find that they're shooting with their hinge, they get some more confidence, and they thought, oh, maybe I'll shoot the thumb button again. And they start with that, and they have massive accuracy with it. And then they start to get cycle. So I'm thinking, why in the world isn't there a thumb button with the click in it? Because the click is what is the major separation point. That's why these professional archers find it's so much easier to control a hinge because of the click.
Right.
So that's what we did. I got together with Stan, and they made the Onyx system. The distance to a click. So you can make it a significant amount of travel to a click. And then what that does in your head is that actually sets up the motor program. You get to do a practice run on your shot activation movement. You get to do it twice in one shot. It's a beautiful thing. So you draw back and aim, right? And then you click, then here I go, which ups your presence, and then you simply increase pressure on the thumb button again. If we had our choice of shooting how we shoot any release aid, we would use single digit manipulation. Like you would be shooting index finger just like you would shoot your rifle.
Yep.
But the problem is, because your body is in tension, it's very difficult for you to control this minute movement. So what we do in archery is we hook in on it, and then we do this bigger movement, right? We actually pull our hand through the strap to make it go off. And we find that easier to control, but it's a big input into the shot. And then we would pull to stretch our hand, but again, it's a big input. A lot of people in the hinge world they'd roll it to the click, and then they pull. When you pull on a hinge, maybe you're rotating it, maybe you're not. So you find this inconsistency in timing, which is an inconsistency in input. The pressures are different in the bow. You're not going to hit the X. But when you can do single digit manipulation because you have a practice run at it, click, fire, it's a very incredibly accurate system. So the accuracy potential is higher with the Onyx clicker just because your input is minimal with it. And, I just shot a nice antelope buck a few days ago with it, and I haven't shot anything with a release since 2009. And I found it amazing, right? I drew back on this buck. I had my equivalizer was hitting the blind. I actually had to open window with my equivalizer while I was at full draw. It was kind of a shit show, right? But when it came, I had my quiver was hitting the chair because I had to get out of the chair. It was a nightmare. But when it came down to the shot, it was money because it was click, and that thing broke so clean. And then I got an opportunity to stalk that buck again and put a second arrow in him. I shot a little bit high on the first one, but it was beautiful, man.
To be fair to people listening, he was also shooting a bow. It was a compound bow with a release A, but it also had no sights on it, just to put things in perspective.
That was pretty cool. So it's just a phenomenal system, and it has a very high accuracy potential. Bodie's been winning all kinds of stuff. He won Reading.
Dude, we got to take a minute just to appreciate your Mr. Miyagi shit you're doing with your boy, man, because that kid is tearing it up.
Yeah.
Like it's insane, man. Yeah. Just congratulations to you, but also to him for a young man to have that level of discipline and focus, for him to be taken out some of the full-grown men that he has taken out. It's insane, man.
Yeah. He's a shooting machine. He just has that control. Now with this Onyx clicker, it's just gone up another level again.
Yeah.
Right. So he's very, very difficult to beat.
I'm gonna have to grab one. You maybe get me off my hinge yet. I've been seeing all the posts and I'm like, this is intriguing. Yeah, it was funny because I have to shoot a hinge with no click because I was finding I was getting in such deep concentration when the click went off. It was like spooking me out of my sequence, and then I would have to resettle all the way back into it. So for myself, I found it much simpler to just have the no click hinge, and then just as soon as I'm back, I'm in that position, and I have it set up where I don't need. You really got to be conscious when you're pulling back, though, because if you don't pay attention for a half a second, you're either flinging an arrow or punching yourself in the face, which, if you're not shooting like that all the time, can pose some risks. And that's the other reason why I do think there's some very positive elements to the thumb button, because you don't have that risk of your bow just going off in your hands.
And when you shoot a hinge with no click in it, you have to have a very consistent starting point of where you're starting. Whereas the click gets you to the same preload every time. Same thing that the thumb button does. But the reason that it spooked you is because you were moving not as a separate, it's its own movement to the click. It's not slow and you're hunting for it. And it kind of surprised you. You
nailed it. That's what it was. Like, it was almost like the whole thing was my shot. Like, I'd probably gotten too deep, too fast into the sequence, and I should have almost been a little bit more superficial, and expediting into that click and then sinking into my sequence. But
the click,
you described it quite well.
On a hinge, draw back and aim. Once the aim is done, roll to the click. Then here I go. Then same motor program, just slow enough you could stop it. You can go nice and smooth to the click, then here I go, then slow enough you could stop it. And that's where the concentration comes in. So using that click as you shutting the door to the aiming room, that's what the sound of that click is, right? It's just you shutting the door on the aiming room. You're now completely detached from that. You're watching it through the window, but you don't have any control over it. So use the click instead of letting the click surprise you. Just a conscious movement to it. That's your only job in that 1 second segment of your shot. It's your only job. Move to the click. Cool. Done with that. Here I go. Done with that decision. Now it's time to get loud, right? Now it's time to get loud in our head so that our thinking is louder than our thoughts.
I love it. I could do this all night, man. This is fantastic. I greatly appreciate you taking the time, as I mentioned before. I wish you the best of luck this season in all your hunts. And man, we'll have to get you back on soon. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Thanks, Joel. Have yourself a good night.
All right. Take care.
Cheers.
So as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, here are the example calling sequences Jeol talked about. Up first, here is the lost calf sequence. Roundup bugle. Bull calling cows bugle.